I thought the storm was going to be the hardest part of that night, but I was wrong. The hardest part was being trapped in the same room with someone who knew the truth I had spent years avoiding. My name is Daniel Carter, and before that night, I believed I understood exactly how to keep my life simple. I planned everything carefully. I avoided unnecessary complications. Most importantly, I learned how to keep certain feelings at a safe distance. That was why I never expected a single storm to change the way I saw someone I thought I already knew. Noah Williams and I had known each other for a long time. We were not strangers, but we were not as close as we once had been. Somewhere along the way, conversations became shorter, visits became less frequent, and the comfortable connection we once shared slowly became something we both avoided talking about. We were still friendly, but there was an invisible distance between us. A distance neither of us seemed ready to explain. Then came the weekend that changed everything. Noah and I had planned a short trip to a small cabin near a quiet lake outside the city. It was supposed to be simple, a few days away from busy schedules, crowded places, and constant responsibilities. The weather forecast mentioned a storm, but neither of us expected it to become the reason we would be forced to stop running from a conversation we had avoided for years. By the time we reached the cabin, the sky had already turned dark. The wind grew stronger, and heavy rain started covering the windows. Within a few hours, the roads became difficult to travel, and we realized leaving was no longer an option until the storm passed. At first, I thought it would be uncomfortable. Noah and I had spent so much time keeping things polite and distant that being stuck together felt strangely unfamiliar. We moved around the cabin quietly, finding small tasks to fill the silence. We made coffee, prepared dinner, and talked about ordinary things. But beneath every conversation was something neither of us mentioned. There were questions that had been waiting for years. There were memories we both remembered but never discussed. As the evening continued, I noticed something different about Noah. He seemed calmer than I expected. While I was focused on the situation outside, he seemed more aware of the things happening between us. He asked simple questions, but they felt deeper than normal conversations. He asked how I had been. He asked if I was happy with where my life was going. He asked things that made me realize he was not just making conversation. He was trying to understand me. I wanted to give easy answers, the same answers I had always given. I wanted to say everything was fine and move on. But something about that night made pretending feel harder than usual. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was the fact that there was nowhere else to go. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in years, Noah and I had no choice but to face the silence between us. I did not know it then, but before that storm ended, Noah would finally admit something he had been keeping to himself for a very long time. And once I heard the truth, I would never look at our relationship the same way again. The storm continued through the night, but the silence between Noah Williams and me felt heavier than the sound of rain against the windows. I had known him for years, yet sitting across from him in that small cabin made me realize how much I did not know. We had become experts at avoiding certain conversations. We knew how to talk about work, daily routines, and simple things that did not require us to reveal too much. But that night was different. There was no busy schedule to interrupt us. There was no easy excuse to leave the conversation unfinished. For the first time in a long time, we had to simply be present with each other. The next morning, the storm was still strong enough that we knew we would be staying at the cabin a little longer. After breakfast, Noah suggested taking a walk around the property. The rain had slowed, and the fresh air made everything feel calmer. As we walked along the quiet path near the lake, I noticed how comfortable the silence felt. Usually, silence between two people made me think something was wrong. With Noah, it felt different. It felt like there were things being understood without needing to be explained. Eventually, Noah broke the silence and asked me something unexpected. He asked if I remembered when we first met. I smiled and told him that of course I remembered. It was years ago, during a time when both of us were trying to figure out what direction our lives were going. He laughed and said that back then, I was much easier to read. I asked him what he meant, and he explained that I used to say exactly what I thought. Over time, I became more careful. I became someone who considered every word before speaking. I wanted to disagree, But I knew he was right. I had changed. Life had taught me to be more cautious, and eventually that caution became part of who I was. I asked Noah why he seemed so interested in understanding me after all this time. He looked away for a moment, like he was searching for the right words. Then he simply said that he always felt like there were things I wanted to say but never did. That answer stayed with me. I wanted to ask what he meant, but part of me was afraid of where that conversation might lead. Instead, I changed the subject. It was an old habit, one I thought I had improved. But Noah noticed. He smiled slightly and said that was exactly what he was talking about. He said I had a way of stepping back whenever something became too personal. I did not know how to respond because he was describing something I had spent years trying not to notice about myself. Later that afternoon, while we sat inside the cabin listening to the storm outside, Noah asked me if I had ever wondered why we stopped being as close as we used to be. That question brought back memories I had not thought about in a long time. There was a period when we talked almost every day. We shared our hopes, our worries, and the little details of life that people usually only share with someone they truly trust. But somewhere along the way, things changed. We never had one major argument or one specific moment that created distance. It happened slowly. Small pauses became longer. Conversations became less frequent. Eventually, we both accepted the space between us without asking why it existed. I looked at Noah and realized something. The storm had not trapped us because there was nowhere else to go. It had trapped us because we finally had nowhere left to hide from the conversation we had been avoiding. And as Noah looked at me, I could tell he was carrying something he had wanted to say for a very long time. The question Noah Williams asked that afternoon stayed in my mind longer than I wanted to admit. I knew exactly what he meant when he asked why we had become distant, but knowing the answer and saying it out loud were two completely different things. Sometimes people do not drift apart because of one big mistake. Sometimes they drift apart because both people quietly decide it is easier not to ask questions. Looking back, that was exactly what happened with us. After we returned from our walk near the lake, we sat inside the cabin while the storm continued outside. The lights flickered occasionally, and the sound of rain filled the quiet moments between our conversations. Normally, I would have found a reason to distract myself. I would have checked my phone, started another activity, or found some way to avoid sitting with uncomfortable thoughts. But that night, I stayed. I let the silence exist. Noah looked at me and said he remembered when we used to talk about everything. He remembered the late conversations, the plans we made, and the way we could spend hours discussing things that most people would consider unimportant. I smiled because I remembered those moments too. What I did not expect was how much I missed them. I told Noah that I thought we had simply grown apart. It was the explanation I had repeated to myself for years because it felt easier than admitting there might have been more behind it. Noah nodded and said he thought the same thing for a long time. But then he admitted something that surprised me. He said he wondered if we had actually grown apart or if we had both just become afraid of being honest. That sentence made me quiet. I thought about all the times I wanted to reach out but stopped myself. All the times I wondered how he was doing but convinced myself it was better not to interrupt his life. I had assumed distance meant respect. Maybe sometimes distance was just another way of avoiding vulnerability. Noah told me that after a while, he started feeling like he was always waiting for me to let him know what I was thinking. He said he never wanted to pressure me, but he also did not want to pretend he did not notice the change between us. Hearing that was difficult because I realized I had spent so much time protecting myself that I never considered how my silence might affect someone else. I had always thought my walls only affected me. I never thought about the space they created between me and the people who cared about me. I asked Noah why he never said anything before. He took a moment before answering. He said he was afraid that bringing it up would make things more complicated. He was afraid that asking for honesty would make me pull away even further. That answer made sense because, in a strange way, we were both doing the same thing. We were both waiting for the other person to make the first move. We both wanted clarity, but we were both afraid of what clarity might reveal. As the evening continued, the conversation became easier. We talked about memories we had not mentioned in years. We laughed about small moments we had almost forgotten. It felt like discovering a familiar place after being away for too long. But underneath the comfort was a feeling I could not ignore. Noah was still holding something back. I could sense it in the way he paused before answering certain questions. I could see it in the way he looked at me when he thought I was not paying attention. The storm outside continued, but the real reason that night felt different was because something between us was beginning to change. And I had a feeling Noah was getting closer to finally telling me what he had been carrying all this time. I could feel that Noah Williams was getting closer to saying something important. There was a different kind of silence between us now. It was not the uncomfortable silence we had carried for years. It was the kind of silence that came before an honest conversation. The kind where both people know something needs to be said, but neither one knows exactly how to begin. That evening, the storm became stronger again, and the cabin felt even more isolated from the outside world. The rain covered every sound, creating a strange feeling that time had slowed down. For once, I was not thinking about tomorrow or what would happen after we left. I was only focused on the moment in front of me. Noah sat across from me near the window, looking outside for a while before finally turning back. He asked me something I did not expect. He asked if I had ever wondered what would have happened if we had talked honestly sooner. I thought about the question carefully. There were many moments when I wanted to reach out. There were times when I almost sent a message, almost called, almost asked if he was doing okay. But every time, I convinced myself there was no reason to reopen something that seemed easier left alone. I told Noah that I thought we were protecting what we had by giving each other space. He looked at me and said he used to believe the same thing. But over time, he started wondering if space was actually helping us or if it was just making it easier to avoid the truth. His words stayed with me because they described something I had never admitted. I had always considered myself someone who valued honesty. But when it came to certain feelings, I was not always honest with myself. I was comfortable discussing plans, responsibilities, and everyday problems. But when conversations became personal, I found ways to step back. Noah noticed that about me long before I was willing to acknowledge it. He told me that he never thought I was cold or uncaring. He said he always believed there was more behind my silence. He thought I was someone who felt deeply but had learned to hide it. Hearing that made me uncomfortable because it felt like he had noticed a part of me I had worked hard to keep private. I asked him why he cared so much about understanding me. The question came out before I could stop myself. Noah became quiet. For a moment, I thought he might avoid answering. Instead, he took a breath and said there was a reason he had always been patient with me. He said there was something he had wanted to tell me for a long time, but he was never sure if it was the right time. My heart started beating faster, not because I was afraid, but because I knew the conversation was reaching a point we had avoided for years. I asked him what stopped him from saying it before. Noah looked down and smiled slightly. He said sometimes the hardest things to admit are not the things people do not know. They are the things people already suspect but are afraid to confirm. That answer left me with more questions than before. I wanted to ask him directly, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of changing everything. Maybe it was because, deep down, I already understood that whatever Noah was about to say would change the way I remembered every moment between us. The storm continued outside, but inside that small cabin, the distance between us was disappearing. And for the first time, I was ready to hear the truth instead of running from it. For a few seconds, neither Noah Williams nor I said anything. The storm continued outside, but inside the cabin, everything felt completely still. I knew this was the moment we had been moving toward since we arrived. The questions, the memories, and the distance between us had all led to this conversation. I looked at Noah and waited, even though a part of me was still unsure if I was ready to hear what he wanted to say. Noah took a slow breath and told me that there was something he had kept to himself for a long time. He said he never stayed quiet because he did not care. It was actually the opposite. He stayed quiet because he cared more than he knew how to explain. Hearing those words changed the way I looked at the past. Suddenly, small moments I had forgotten began to feel different. The times Noah checked on me when I was having a difficult week. The moments when he remembered details I never expected anyone to notice. The way he always seemed to understand when I needed space but never completely disappeared. I had always seen those things as simple acts of kindness. I never considered that there might have been a deeper reason behind them. Noah explained that over the years, he noticed how quickly I created distance whenever things became emotionally complicated. He said he respected that because he understood everyone has their own way of protecting themselves. But he also admitted that he wished I would have trusted him enough to let him understand me better. That sentence stayed with me because it revealed something I had never wanted to admit. I wanted to be understood. I just did not know how to allow someone to see the parts of me that I usually kept hidden. I told Noah that I thought keeping my feelings controlled was the responsible thing to do. I believed that if I never expected too much from anyone, I would never be disappointed. Noah listened carefully and then said something I would remember for a long time. He said that avoiding disappointment also meant avoiding some of the best experiences life could offer. I did not have an answer because I knew there was truth in what he said. For years, I had focused so much on preventing negative outcomes that I rarely considered what I might be missing. Noah was not asking me to suddenly change everything about myself. He was not asking me to ignore my boundaries or become someone I was not. He was simply asking me to be honest about what I wanted. The conversation was not dramatic. There were no perfect words or impossible promises. It was just two people finally admitting the things they had been too careful to say. As the night continued, I found myself remembering every moment that brought us to that cabin. The years of friendship, the growing distance, and all the times we almost had this conversation but stopped ourselves. I realized that Noah's confession was not only about his feelings. It was also about the trust we had lost and the possibility of rebuilding it. When the storm eventually began to calm, I noticed something had changed. The situation outside was becoming easier, but the bigger change was happening between us. The walls I had built were still there, but they no longer felt impossible to open. And as Noah looked at me, I knew this was only the beginning of the truth we had spent years avoiding. After Noah Williams finally said what he had been keeping inside, I expected to feel overwhelmed. I thought hearing the truth would completely change the way I saw everything between us. Instead, what surprised me most was how natural it felt. There was no sudden feeling that everything had to be different immediately. There was only honesty, and after years of avoiding that honesty, it felt strangely peaceful. The next morning, the storm had started to fade. The rain was lighter, and the gray clouds outside the cabin slowly began to break apart. For the first time since we arrived, the world outside felt open again. But even though the storm was ending, I knew the conversation between Noah and me was not finished. We sat together with coffee near the window, talking about everything we had left unsaid over the years. Noah explained that he never wanted his feelings to become a burden for me. That was why he waited so long before saying anything. He knew I valued my independence, and he never wanted me to feel pressured to respond in a certain way. He just wanted me to know the truth instead of allowing more time to pass with both of us pretending everything was the same. I appreciated that more than I could explain. One of my biggest fears had always been that opening up would mean losing control of my own life. But Noah showed me that honesty did not take away my choices. It actually gave me more freedom because I was no longer making decisions based only on fear. I told Noah something I had never really admitted before. I told him that I was not afraid of caring about people. I was afraid of what might happen after I cared. I was afraid of disappointment, change, and the possibility that something meaningful could disappear. Noah listened quietly and said he understood. He told me that everyone carries fears they do not always show. The difference is whether those fears control every decision they make. His words made me think about how many opportunities one had avoided because I was trying to protect myself from situations that had not even happened yet. Looking back, I realized I had spent years preparing for possible problems instead of allowing myself to experience possible happiness. After that conversation, things between Noah and me felt different, but not in a way that felt forced. We did not suddenly become completely different people. We were still the same two people who had known each other for years. The difference was that there was no longer an invisible distance between us. We could talk honestly. We could ask questions instead of making assumptions. We could admit when something mattered instead of pretending it did not. Before leaving the cabin, Noah and I walked once more near the lake. The storm had changed the landscape slightly, but everything looked peaceful. I thought about how strange it was that something unexpected had brought us to a place we had avoided for so long. Being stuck there had removed every distraction we usually used to avoid difficult conversations. It gave us the chance to finally understand each other. As we prepared to return home, I realized something important. Noah's confession was not the end of our story. It was the beginning of a more honest one. The storm had not created our connection. It had simply given us the courage to finally acknowledge it. When Noah Williams and I left the cabin, I thought returning to normal life would feel strange. After spending so much time in a quiet place where every conversation mattered, I wondered if the outside world would bring back the same distance we had before. But something had changed. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because we were no longer pretending. We had finally said the things we had avoided for years, and that honesty created a different kind of connection between us. The drive back was peaceful. We talked about simple things, laughed about small moments from the trip, and even joked about how a storm had forced us into the exact conversation we had been avoiding. It felt unusual to admit that something unexpected had brought us closer instead of creating more distance. When we returned to the city, life slowly became busy again. Work, responsibilities, and daily routines started filling our schedules. But this time, we did not allow those things to create the same silence between us. Noah and I made an effort to stay connected. We talked more often, not because we felt obligated to, but because we genuinely wanted to know what was happening in each other's lives. I noticed small changes in myself. Before the trip, I would often assume I already knew what people were thinking. I would create explanations in my mind instead of simply asking questions. With Noah, I started learning a different way of communicating. I learned that understanding someone does not come from guessing. It comes from being willing to listen. One evening, Noah and I met at a small coffee shop near the park. We talked about how different things felt compared to a few months earlier. He told me that he noticed I seemed more comfortable expressing myself. I laughed and said I was still learning. I was not suddenly someone who shared every thought without hesitation. I still valued my personal space. I still needed time to process my feelings. But now I understood that needing space did not mean I had to disappear. That was something I had never considered before. I used to believe that protecting myself meant handling everything alone. Now I realized that letting someone support me did not make me less independent. It simply meant I trusted the right person enough to share parts of my journey. Noah reminded me that relationships are not built through one big moment. They are created through many small choices. Choosing to communicate, choosing to be honest, choosing to stay present even when things feel uncertain. Looking back at the night of the storm, I realized the most important thing was not the confession itself. It was everything that came after. The storm gave us a moment to be honest, but we were the ones who decided what to do with that honesty. We could have returned to our old habits. We could have ignored the conversation and acted like nothing changed. Instead, we chose something different. We chose to understand each other better. I used to think strong connections happened when two people had everything figured out. Now I knew the opposite was true. Sometimes the strongest connections happen when two people are willing to admit they do not have all the answers. Noah did not change who I was. He simply reminded me that I did not have to hide every part of myself to be accepted. And that was a lesson I would carry long after the storm was forgotten. After everything that happened with Noah Williams, I started seeing my life differently. Not because my personality had completely changed, but because I finally understood that protecting myself did not mean keeping everyone at a distance. For years, I believed that independence meant never relying on anyone. I thought needing support was a sign that I was not strong enough. But the more time I spent with Noah, the more I realized that real connection did not take away my strength. It gave me a different kind of confidence. A few months after the storm, Noah and I returned to the lake where everything had changed. It was not the same cabin, and there was no storm surrounding us this time. The sky was clear, the water was calm, and the entire place felt completely different. I found it interesting that the location looked almost the same, but my perspective had changed so much. The place that once represented uncertainty now reminded me of honesty and growth. As we walked near the lake, Noah asked me if I ever thought about what would have happened if we never got trapped there. I smiled because I had asked myself that question many times. Maybe we would have continued living our separate lives. Maybe we would have continued being polite while avoiding the conversations that mattered most. Maybe we would have convinced ourselves that distance was easier than honesty. I told Noah that I was grateful the storm gave us the opportunity to stop running from something important. He smiled and said he thought the same thing. But he also reminded me that the storm itself was not what changed us. The storm only created the moment. We were the ones who chose to be honest. That idea stayed with me because it applied to more than just our relationship. Life often gives people unexpected moments that reveal what they have been avoiding. The important part is what they decide to do after those moments appear. I started noticing how differently I handled situations. When something bothered me, I was more willing to talk about it instead of pretending everything was fine. When I needed time, I explained it instead of disappearing. When someone showed that they cared, I allowed myself to accept it instead of immediately looking for reasons to create distance. Noah never asked me to become someone else. He simply showed me that I could be completely myself and still allow someone to know me. That was something I never thought was possible before. I used to believe that people either accepted you exactly as you were or they eventually left. Noah helped me understand that the right people do not require you to be perfect. They simply want you to be honest. Over time, our connection became something built on trust instead of assumptions. We still had different opinions. We still had moments when we needed space. But the difference was that we knew how to communicate those things. We no longer relied on silence to protect what mattered. Looking back, I realized the biggest lesson from that storm was not about Noah. It was about me. I learned that being open does not mean losing control. I learned that vulnerability does not make someone weak. And I learned that sometimes the person who challenges your comfort zone is not trying to change you. Sometimes they are helping you discover a part of yourself that you were afraid to show. Noah entered my life during a moment when I thought keeping my distance was the safest choice. But he helped me understand that the safest place is not always the place where you are alone. Sometimes it is the place where you are finally understood. Looking back at the night when Noah Williams and I were trapped by the storm, I used to think the most important moment was the truth he finally shared with me. But with time, I realized the real change happened after that night. It was not only about what Noah admitted. It was about what both of us chose to do once we stopped hiding behind silence. Before that storm, I thought some connections were easier to leave untouched. I believed that if something was complicated, the safest choice was to step back before it could become painful. But Noah taught me that avoiding uncertainty also meant avoiding the possibility of something meaningful. The storm did not magically solve everything between us. It simply gave us a chance to finally be honest. The rest was up to us. Months later, I found myself thinking about how different my life felt. I was still the same person in many ways. I still enjoyed quiet moments. I still needed time to process my thoughts. I still valued having my own space. The difference was that I no longer saw those things as reasons to keep people away. I understood that someone could respect my boundaries while still wanting to be part of my life. Noah showed me that trust was not built by forcing someone to open up. It was built by creating a space where they felt comfortable enough to do it on their own. One evening, Noah and I sat together and talked about how much had changed since that trip. We laughed about how unexpected everything had been. Neither of us planned for a storm to bring old conversations back into our lives. Neither of us expected a difficult situation to become one of the most meaningful experiences we had shared. But sometimes life creates moments that reveal what has been there all along. I told Noah that I used to think people had to completely understand each other before they could become close. Now I believed something different. I believed understanding was something people built together over time. It came from asking questions, listening carefully, and being willing to accept that another person might see the world differently. Noah smiled and told me that was the biggest change he noticed in me. He said I was no longer waiting for people to prove they were safe before allowing myself to connect. I was learning to recognize when someone already was. That meant more to me than he probably realized. For years, I had focused on avoiding disappointment. I never considered how much I might lose by refusing to take emotional risks. I learned that being open does not guarantee that everything will always go perfectly. People can still change. Situations can still be uncertain. But that does not mean every connection should be avoided. Some moments are worth experiencing even when there is no guarantee of what comes next. When I think about Noah now, I do not think about the storm as the thing that brought us together. I think about the honesty that followed it. I think about two people who finally stopped assuming and started communicating. I think about how a single conversation can change the way you understand someone and even the way you understand yourself. The truth Noah shared that night was important, but the lesson I carried with me was even greater. Sometimes the person who enters your life is not there to break down the walls you built. Sometimes they are there to show you that you have the choice to open the door when you are ready. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready.